Hey.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Ben. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Happy Tuesday. Thank you.
Yeah, happy Tuesday. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. We got a few people on already.
Yeah, we got a few people. We
Oh,
got Axel joining us too, as
yes,
always.
Axel in the background.
For those who don't know, Axel is a Bible study, not a teacher yet. He's an apprentice.
Yeah.
We're gonna get him there. Um, but yeah, no, we thank you for joining us for Bible study. Happy Tuesday, everybody. God bless you. Thank you for
Hey.
coming.
All right. How are you feeling?
Oh, I feel, in the words of James Brown, I feel good.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness. Welcome
Oh
to
my,
Bible study where we have our
yeah.
jokes too.
Yeah. So, man, this is. I feel this is a important. I feel like this is a marking point for Bible study.
Yes.
Um, everyone, I assume most people know, but if you don't, we're walking through the Old Testament and looking through each book and the narrative, looking at the key themes and narratives. And today we will be going into the book of Deuteronomy, which is
Yes.
very exciting. It's the last book of the Torah, so it's definitely we're finishing a section of the Bible, and we'll be moving into a new one next time. So that's exciting.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, thank you for all of you that have been on this journey with us since before Genesis, when Pastor gave the Bible study about how to read the Bible, what is the Bible, right? Thank you for everyone who's joined us, who's
Yeah,
been with us since the beginning of the year, and who continue to join us or join us for the first time today. We appreciate you. We welcome you. Um, Quickly, who we have online with us? Who we have? We have Bree. She came on early. Bree, you made me think that we went live by accident. We appreciate you. We saw her
Jesse
comment
was
come up.
freaking out backstage.
I know. Her comment showed up like at 7:38, and I was like, "Wait, are we live?" But we appreciate you, Bree. Thank you for joining, Pastor Ezekiel. God bless you, Pastor Michael, Pastor Sarai. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Bernard, aka Eric, he put in here that, by the way, it's Eric. God bless you. Thank you for joining us,
I couldn't see the
Ryan.
photo.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. No, but he put down here too that he's actually Eric. He,
Yeah.
he let people know. My love, thank you for joining us. And we have a pretty good crowd so far. Pastor Tanya, welcome. God bless you. And Tanya Marie, thank you. If you guys haven't shared it yet, if you haven't tagged anybody yet, please share the stream, tag people. We'd love to have them with us, and we'd love having you with us as we close out the Torah, which is very exciting and very for whatever reason very emotional for me. I was telling pastors today, I was like, this is so emotional for me. Reading the end of Deuteronomy, it really had me it had me in tears, kind of reading it and setting it up. So I'm excited to have you guys join us. And Ben, and thank you for being here with me. Um,
Yeah, of
we close
course.
this out. So um,
Yeah. For reference, anyone, this is the Torah, that's the structure that Ezekiel shared with us during Leviticus. So as you can see, we're on that last one, and that's really exciting.
yeah,
So I just wanted to show you guys that this is what we're talking about when we say the Torah. um,
absolutely.
so, I mean, without further ado, we can pray and then we can get into it.
All right, sounds good. Go
Thank you.
ahead.
Father, thank you for bringing us all here together today. We ask for patience as we comb through your word and read it as individuals and come together like this as a group to learn. We ask for wisdom and understanding. We seek to know you better through these texts and through your word. We ask that you'll give clarity to all of our minds and especially to Jesse's. And we ask that you just guide our hearts and our minds as we continue on this journey. Amen.
Amen. And thank you, thank you. So yeah, let's get started. Deuteronomy. Like I said, the Deuteronomy concludes the Pentateuch, which is the Torah, right? The first five books of the Bible. And in Deuteronomy, we read these speeches, so speeches from Moses. So Moses is reviewing, and in these speeches he's reviewing teachings and events from the times that we read about in Exodus, and in Numbers, we read about the people's wilderness wanderings, and he's basically speaking to the next generation of Israel. He's reminding them, kind of giving them a recap of what has happened with the people, what we should have learned from this, everything that a lot of key things and key places and events that happened in Exodus and Numbers. So it's also a book of counsel. So Moses is giving these speeches to this next generation to counsel them, and it's also advice as they enter this huge transition, which is that they're finally going to enter the promised land. And not only are they entering the promised land, they're doing so under a change of leadership. And Moses is, spoiler alert, Moses is not going with them. And if you were here for Numbers, we found that out then as well, that
Yeah.
Moses is not going to cross the Jordan with the Israelites. So not only are they going to enter this promised land, they're entering this promised land under a new leader, which is it's a really big transition. So
Yeah.
we read here, what we're reading in Deuteronomy is that he's just encouraging the people, exhorting the people to love their God Yahweh and to obey his commands. A little bit about the background of Deuteronomy. Like Deuteronomy's narrative is set on the plains of Moab, which is just across the Jordan River from the Promised Land, and this is where the Israelites are camping after 40 years of their wilderness wandering. So this places us within the same time period as the closing chapters of Numbers. The title, so where we left off in Numbers. So the title of Deuteronomy means second law, and which is, I think, it's actually a pretty good name for it because Moses is reviewing and going through the law again with with this second generation of Israelites, or this next generation of Israelites. The book reiterates the law and events according to Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. So the title Deuteronomy, again, like I said, second law, but its purpose is to prepare this generation of Israel to enter, again, this promised land, recounting the history, what God has done, how they should respond to God. And this is all meant to prepare them for this place, which before we even get into reading the book of Deuteronomy, just reading the background, getting into it, the background of Deuteronomy and the purpose, we already see this key theme, this new key theme we've been to call prepared for the place. So Moses knows his time is coming to an end, and he wanted to prepare this generation of Israel to enter into the promised land. Because I think we can actually, we as humans, we even in our own life, we know that a blessing or a place of blessing or any type of blessing can be a curse if we're not prepared for it.
Hmm.
Moses knew that in order for this place of blessing to be a blessing, these people needed to be prepared to enter it. It's not just about entering into this place; it's preparing themselves for the place of promise. So, a little more about Deuteronomy, the structure of Deuteronomy. We see that Deuteronomy has three major sections, which is followed by an epilogue at the end. Each major section presents a speech by Moses that begins with a special phrase, making it as a distinct unit. So the special phrase distinctly separates that unit. So the first speech is from Deuteronomy chapter 1 to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 43. And it's introduced with the phrase stating, and I'll post it here, the verse here, so you guys can see it. You see Deuteronomy 1, verse 1 starts with, "These are the words Moses spoke to all Israel in the wilderness, east of the Jordan." So the words. We see it with the words. So in Hebrew, Deuteronomy is Devarim, which means the words. So God uses. I'm sorry, Robert.
Also, a very good name for this book.
Yeah. I feel like it's exotic, right? Devarim. Let me bring a little. Deuteronomy is good too, but, but Moses uses this wilderness journey and the lessons along the way to teach this generation of Israel about God. So he wants them to grasp that even their history shows that Yahweh is God, that that Yahweh is faithful to his people, and that Yahweh is able to overcome their enemies. That, and he's letting them know like that you must trust and obey him. You should and you must trust and obey him. And if you don't trust and obey Yahweh, if you don't follow Yahweh's ways, you will not be able to live long term in this promised land. You will not be prepared to keep it. You will not be prepared to survive it. or to maintain it, to or actually live it out in the way that God wants you to. So
We already saw in Numbers, if anyone remembers, that when they tried to enter the promised land without God, they were immediately defeated by the inhabitants of the land.
yeah,
So we've been shown very clearly how much they need to be moving with God.
yeah, absolutely. You said in Numbers, in Exodus, and in Genesis, I
Yeah,
think
if
like
it
even
wasn't clear
before.
already before then, it was
Yeah,
made pretty clear.
yeah, and he's just reiterating it to them like you need to choose Yahweh. If you don't choose Yahweh, you're not going to be able to live long term in this promised land. Like it's not going to be the promised land or every like the promised land that God intended to be for you, right? So getting right into it, chapter 1, verses 1 through 8. We, like I said, we continue where we left off at the end of Numbers, the plains of Moab, the place where Israel camped after that victory. And right in chapter 1, we're introduced to this new key theme, which is the key theme of remember. So Moses begins by mentioning key geographical places, markers, or geographical markers like Oreb, which is Mount Sinai, and Kadesh Barnea. So the mention of Oreb serves as a reminder of the covenant established between Yahweh and Israel and Mount Sinai. How many remember that in Exodus? And the reference to Kadesh Barnea serves as a reminder of how Israel failed to trust in Yahweh after he delivered them from Egypt. So we read in Numbers that because of their unbelief, that generation lost the privilege of inheriting or entering the promised land. So this privilege would now be given to the generation after them, which is the generation that Moses is addressing here in Deuteronomy. A generation that either was not present at Mount Sinai or too young at the time to really remember it themselves. And we were talking about this in the Bible study before the Bible study. In Numbers, it says that if whoever was of the age of 20 and older was not going to enter the promised land, like
Right.
they're not going in. So that means you have to be the oldest 19 and I say it because it says 20 years old, right? So let's say 40 years from then, you're around 59 years old, right? The oldest person maybe around 59 years old at this time. And I'm 33. If I think about what happened when I was 19, I remember, I guess, really key parts of it. But to tell you the truth, I don't remember a lot of what happened when I was 19, like in detail. I would say that I would need to be, if it's something really that I really need to know about what happened at that time in my life, I would need to be reminded, because life and everything, to remember things that happened at 19 in detail, it's kind of hard for me. I would need to be reminded. So here, Moses is reminding these people, even if they're 59 and they were 19 at the time, reminding them of what Yahweh has done, the victories, the lessons learned, the things that happened. Um, and you also mentioned too, Ben, we had a really good conversation before we started, that when we're reading this book, Deuteronomy, Moses, when he's talking about these past events, these things that the generation before them did, how they failed, Moses addresses this generation as you, like basically saying like, when you did this and when you did that, when in reality, we know either they weren't there or they were considered, I guess, by God too young to be held accountable for what happened, which is why they're making it to the promised land. So like, why would then Moses say you? Like, why would he address them as like you, as in you, what you did?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. And it will be things that happen to them too, like when God brought you out of Egypt, and when you saw the fire at Mount Sinai.
yeah, exactly. Like that, a lot of them weren't either born for or were too young, to be held
Right.
accountable for
And
it.
which Moses knows.
Yeah, exactly. Moses knows. So that leads us to believe, right? Like we know that Moses is 120 years old at this time, right?
Right.
But we also know, we read later on that you know, he was strong. He was still strong, but it's not like he forgot that he's speaking to this new generation. This
Right.
is just the narrative of the people. Of this is actually really the narrative for humanity, right? He knows that these people are capable of disobeying God or Yahweh, just like their parents did. So he's addressing them with the seriousness and like of you when you did this, when you did that, because he knows you are capable of doing the same thing or turning your back on God the way the generation before you did.
Right.
So yeah, so like I said, he's just reminding them of Israel's victories. He reminds them of victories over the Amorite kings, Shihon and Og. And in verses 6 through 8, we read Moses recounting the time where they were instructed to leave Oreb. And I put that up here quickly. And if you want to read that, then you go ahead and read that.
All right. Start here. Oh no, that's the wrong one. I apologize.
They're good, no problem. Here you go.
All right. The Lord our God said to us at Oreb, "You have stayed long enough at this mountain. Break camp and advance into the hill country of the Amorites. Go to all the neighboring peoples in Arabah, in the mountains, in the western foothills, in the Negev, and along the coast, to the land of the Canaanites and to Lebanon, as far as the great river, the Euphrates. See, I have given you this land. Go in and take possession of the land the Lord swore he would give to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to their descendants after them."
So see, I have given you this land. Go in and take possession of the land the Lord swore he would give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their descendants after them. So we run into that key theme again, like a theme we ran into Exodus, the key theme of covenant, right? He's reminding them of the covenant that he made with their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he wants people to remember what God has done for them, who he desires to be to them, what happens when the people choose to disobey God. And he wants to remind them that the land you're about to enter was promised not just to you, to our people, but it was promised to our forefathers from long ago. Like you're entering a promise that God has kept to these people that came way before you, right? So, and that's beautiful. We just see God keeping his covenant. We see that key theme of covenant again here.
Mm-hmm.
So when we keep reading, we read verses 9 through 18. That summarizes the accounts from Exodus and Numbers of how Moses was he assigned leadership roles to others in the community to relieve some administrative burdens. Because yes, I could imagine being the person that everyone goes to for counsel, being the person that everyone goes to solve an issue. It's kind of like, all right, there's millions of you now. I need to delegate some work to other people. And I believe he's reiterating this to them so that they can continue to establish this sense of order and continue to use this type of wisdom, as they enter this promised land, to continue to have this sense of order and continue to use this wisdom and delegate to delegate administrative things for the person who's to lead after him and for the community, right? So in verses 19 to 46, we see that he recounts in more detail the Israelites' failure that caused them to be 40 years in the wilderness. And that basically the punishment that made this new generation of Israelites the people who would take part of the conquest of the promised land and not the people before them, right? He recounts how he says that per the Israelites' idea that they sent out 12 spies to scope the land God was giving them. And when the spies returned and said that the land was good, still the people did not want to enter out of fear of the giants in that land and the Amalekites and the Canaanites. So their complaining and their unwillingness to enter resulted in their disqualification to inherit the place of promise. And we read in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 35, that Moses tells them that God said, "No one from this evil generation shall see the good land I swore to give your ancestors." And like you mentioned last Bible study, in Numbers 14, we read that only Caleb and Joshua would be the ones from that generation to enter the promised land, right? Which is crazy. It's really profound, right? Like, man, because they didn't want to enter because they were afraid. Now it's like, okay, now none of you will enter. The only ones that will enter is the 2 spies that came back and said that this land was good.
Right.
And said that we should enter. So
I just occurred to me, I didn't mention it at the beginning, and so I just wanted to interject real quick. It goes for all of the Bible studies, but I want to repeat it in case someone is new. if you have any questions, please feel free to just type them in the as a comment, and I'll keep my eyes out for them, and we can stop and address them. Please feel free to share questions. We love to have interaction and to discuss things with you. Even if it's something like if we skip over a section and you had a question about it, you can still ask that question. It's all right.
And if I don't know, I will be honest, and I
Yeah.
will tell you. We'll get back to
We
you.
can't
We'll have to have a conversation.
We can't promise to have an answer to every question, but we really would still appreciate that.
But we would promise.
Even the question can be edifying for all of us.
Absolutely. Or if you see anything, any correlation to what we've gone through so far, from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, or anything like that, you mentioned, or if you see a thread or a connection, a theme, let us know in the comments.
Absolutely.
But yeah, Moses is reminding the people of what choosing their own wisdom looks like. So when we read also in Numbers that when God punishes them by disqualifying them to enter, Israel then says, "Oh no, well we changed our mind. We want to conquer. We want to enter the promised land anyway. After all." But you read that Moses warns them and tells them, "Don't do this. The Lord is not going to be with you. He's not with you." But still, they did what they wanted, and what happens to them? They are completely demolished by the Amalekites and the Canaanites. They get a beating by the Amalekites and the Canaanites because they try to carry out a decision that God was not in, which we then see again that key theme from back in Genesis. Whose wisdom? What happens when people choose to do what they believe is right or what they want to do instead of they choose their own wisdom instead of God's wisdom, right?
They can't. If they thought that they got themselves out of Egypt on their own and got themselves through the wilderness on their own and thought that they could get the promised land on their own, it's a very potent reminder that that's not true, that they are not doing this by their own strength.
Yeah, and the pastor says when they change their mind, God says, "No way, Jose, LOL, evil generation." He said, we just read that. We read it that he says that what do you know that he says this wicked, no one from this evil generation shall see the good land I swore to give your ancestors. And he's just reminding them of what it looks like when we choose our own wisdom over God's wisdom. So you continue into Deuteronomy, you continue to chapters 2 to 3. 2 to 3 details Israel's departure from Kadesh Barnea, where that whole debacle happened. And it continues to recount victories and losses and lessons that should be learned, how the land was divided after the victories, etc. And we know also that Israel spent most of their wilderness period in the wilderness of Zin, which is in the vicinity of Kadesh Barnea. So they spent a lot of their wilderness journey in this vicinity. Chapter 3, verses 23 to 28, Moses closes his historical recap with telling the people how he pleaded with God to allow him to cross the Jordan into the promised land. And I'll post that here so we can read it. And it says, as it comes up, it says, "At the time, I pleaded with the Lord, 'Sovereign Lord, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do the deeds and mighty works you do? Let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that fine hill country and Lebanon. But because of you,'" and so unto the people, this generation said, "Because of you, the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me." Okay, Moses. All right, Moses, if you want to believe that, that's fine. We'll go into it. It's not like something happened in Meribah or anything like that. Not like he disobeyed God there. But God tells him, "That is enough," the Lord said. "Do not speak to me anymore about this matter. Go up to the top of Pisgah, and look west and north and south and east. Look at the land with your own eyes. Since you are not going across this Jordan, but commission Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he will lead the people across and will cause them to inherit the land that you will see." So as we just read here, God told them Joshua was going to be the one to lead Israel during the conquest of Canaan. Like Joshua's going to be the one to cross the Jordan with the people and enter the promised land. So we read here that Moses was only allowed to look out and see the land from a distance. He was forbidden from entering the land because he had disobeyed Yahweh and Meribah. We were talking about earlier too, like Moses saying, like, because he was angry at you, because the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me because of how angry he was with you. And it's like, okay, it's not like Meribah didn't happen, right, Moses? But um he just lets them know that Joshua is going to be the one to lead them. He's not going to enter the promised land with them, which is very sad. But it just also shows that, God also is not showing some favoritism too, in the sense of like, oh, only the people of Israel will get punished for their disobedience. But Moses, you're not exempt from that either, from your disobedience when you choose to disobey me too. And it's just a consequence of when we don't choose to do, or we don't choose to obey Yahweh. Um, he wants Moses wants the generation to know that though the generation before them and he himself broke covenant, and that even though God did bring this punishment on them because of their disobedience, God has not abandoned his covenant promise. And he's allowing them to enter the promised land. So we see this key theme of covenant again. He's letting them know, like, yeah, I broke covenant. I didn't listen. I disobeyed. Generation before you, they disobeyed. But God is true to his promise. And he'll never go back on his promise. He has not abandoned the covenant promise. Even when we abandon the covenant promise, God
Mm.
has not abandoned covenant promise. So it's very profound. Just letting them know, like, though we're not faithful, God remains faithful.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like
So
what we talked about at the end of Numbers, the fact that after all of that, all the chaos of that book, that God still was there with them,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He's letting them
trying
know,
to
yeah,
fulfill the promise.
reminding them when we're not faithful, God remains faithful. So if we read chapter 4, verses 1 through 43, we read that Moses continues to leverage this historical recap and other historical references to call Israel to obey Yahweh. He's using this to try to bring them in and convince them to obey Yahweh. And he reminds Israel of Yahweh's judgment brought by their idolatry at Baal Peor, which you could read in Numbers chapter 25. In my Bible, when you see the heading of Numbers chapter 25, it says Moab seduces Israel. And that's exactly what happens. We read that while Israel was staying in that region, that the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with the Moabite women. That they invited them to the sacrifices of their gods, and that they ate these sacrificial meats and meals, and they bowed down before these gods. And it says in Numbers 25:3, it says, so Israel yoked themselves to Baal of Peor. And it says, and the Lord's anger burned against them. And I was telling you that when I read that so Israel yoked themselves to Baal of Peor, like that word yoked, we read like later on in the Bible, we read about being unequally yoked, right? And
Mhm.
how that just triggered in my mind, like, think about infidelity. It triggers the thought of infidelity, because when you're unequally yoked with someone, it's basically saying, like, you are, if you're unequally yoked with someone, it's not just someone that you said hi to or someone casually. It's someone you're connected to. It's someone you have a relationship with. Not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship or anything like that, but it's someone that you are connected to, that you have a connection with. So to be unequally yoked, or to be yoked to somebody, is to be with someone, attached to someone. So
Mhm.
for when you see here,
You're like bound.
Israel, yeah, bound to somebody. There you go. So when you see here, so Israel yoked themselves to Baal, they bound themselves to Baal Peor. It just brings this imagery of
Hmm.
adultery to me, about, like, here's Israel again, not just disobeying God, but being unfaithful to God, right? Um, so it just brought that imagery. I'm like, wow, like the unfaithfulness that happened here at Baal Peor, like the breaking of that covenant again, that relationship again. So we also could read that in this passage that Moses also then talks about or alludes to their parents' experience of Yahweh's presence at Sinai, where they first entered covenant relationship with God. right? So he's talking about when they broke covenant and when they entered covenant, or just another time where they broke covenant, because they broke covenant multiple times, right? But I believe this was meant to bring that word yoked was meant to bring to the forefront of our minds that imagery of that being bound,
Yeah.
God, then being bound, then them binding themselves to idols,
Hmm.
and that the unfaithfulness there. Um,
And it kind of brings that, because they were bound in slavery in Egypt, and so it's also has that feeling of like they're kind of like re-enslaving themselves now to
yeah,
this other deity,
like
like
you're
they were
giving
bound,
yourself away. You're giving
which
yourself,
is right. It's utter ridiculousness.
and also just very sad, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
Infidelity in any sense of the word, and even the ones we think about in modern day, like adultery and things like that, and infidelity
yeah.
in relationships, just brings destruction. It brings very sad. Um, it's very very sad, you know. And I think we're meant to just feel the sadness and the disappointment here of, again, Israel cheating on God, the adultery done towards God, you know. Um, but Moses is speaking to these people, and he's reminding them of these things, because now the punishment of the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, the punishment of wandering is over, and the inheritance of Yahweh's promised land is imminent. Like, that time is over. That generation has passed, except for Caleb and Joshua, right? Um, and now it's time to enter the promised land. So Moses is laying out the requirements for a successful conquest of this land. Like, for you, this is how you succeed in conquering this land. And the most important thing that Israel must do is maintain total devotion to Yahweh alone, which again reiterates that theme, prepared for the place. It's not just entering this place, but to be prepared for the place. And how you, the most important way that you can prepare yourself for this place is your devotion to Yahweh. That's the only way. Like this, you're not going to be able to do it without devotion to God. So we read here in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 1 through 2. I'll put it up then if you want to read it here.
Okay. This is the right place to start, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now Israel, hear the decrees and laws I am about to teach you. Follow them so that you may live and may go in and take possession of the land the Lord, the God of your ancestors, is giving you. Do not add to what I command you, and do not subtract from it, but keep the commands of the Lord your God that I give you.
Yeah. So you see here, and then you continue to read chapter 4. You read verses 22 through 24. You can read that too, Ben.
I will die in this land. I will not cross the Jordan, but you are about to cross over and take possession of the good land. Be careful not to forget the covenant of the Lord your God that he made with you. Do not make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything the Lord your God has forbidden, for the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God.
So we see, like, Moses reiterating again, telling them, I will die in this land. I'm not crossing the Jordan with you. Like, I'm not going with you. But you're about to cross over and take possession of that good land. So he's also reminding, we see this key theme again that we were introduced to in Exodus, idolatry, right? He's reminding the people on how serious God is when it comes to idols. Like, that they must, you must learn from what happened with the Moabites. There's a lot of other incidents you can learn from too, but he just finished telling them about what happened in Moab. It's like, you must learn from what happened with the Moabites. Yahweh is your God. He's the only God who has delivered them and is now giving them the land that he promised to their ancestors. And as we continue to read chapter 4, we hit this another key theme that we're introduced to in Deuteronomy, and that key theme is remember. And that's what he's trying to do this whole time too. He's trying to bring them into remembrance. Like, if they were to, like, he's trying to educate them on what happened if they weren't there. But those who possibly could have been there, they were too young to remember, he's telling them, we need to remember. And if you read chapter 4, verse 32 through 35, I'll read this one just so.
Okay.
I'll read this one. But We read here, verse 32, 35. Ask now about the former days. So he's telling them, ask about the past, long before your time, from the day God created human beings on this earth. Ask from one end of the heavens to the other. Has anything so great as this ever happened? Or has anything like it ever been heard of? Has any other people heard the voice of God speaking out of fire as you have and lived? Like he's like, just remember or ask about the things that have happened. Like, and look how profound. Like this, like he's saying, like, has any other people heard the voice of God speaking out of fire as you have and lived? Has any God ever tried to take for himself one nation out of another nation by testings, by signs and wonders, by war, by a mighty hand? Here's that theme again that we had in Exodus, mighty hand, right? And an outstretched arm, or by great and awesome deeds, like all the things the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes. You were shown these things so that you might know that the Lord is God. Beside him, there is no other. So by prompting them to remember or ask about the former days, ask about the things that happened, Moses is pleading with Israel to remain faithful to Yahweh by essentially arguing that their history, the history itself, validates Yahweh alone as the true God. Like, you want proof that Yahweh is the true God? Just look at the history. Just ask about the things that have happened. Just look back for a moment. And that in itself will validate Yahweh as God and God alone. Like, he's saying no other God has ever accomplished what he did at creation. No other God has accomplished what he did with in the Exodus, at Mount Sinai, and etc. and etc. etc. Like, no other God has the power and the authority to do these things. So if you want proof, if you're still doubting, if you want proof that God is the true God, all you have to do is look in the past. Like, that's been proven time and time again that Yahweh is the one and only true God. So it's really, really profound. And I think we can also take something from that too. Like, we want proof that Yahweh is the true God. We can find it in the Torah that we just read. We just read. But also, I think if we take a good look at our own lives, right? And we look back and we just remember our history, our testimony, our past will confirm or validate that God is the true God, that God is real, and that
I
he is
think,
powerful.
yeah, I think it links back to the weirdness, if you will, of the fact that Moses addresses them as though they were present
Mm-hmm.
for the coming out of Egypt when this generation was not, or anyone in this generation that was very young. And I think that it harkens forward into the narrative. There's people that are reading this, that are going to read this, in the promised land generations later. And what Moses is calling them into, in that generation into, and in a way, all of us into, anyone that's reading it, is that this narrative is not only really important to remember, but that in a way, it is your narrative.
Yeah,
Like, you may not have been present for this specific exodus out of Egypt, but you've been brought out of an Egypt,
yeah,
and you've been brought through a wilderness, and this is in a way your narrative.
yeah,
And he's asking us to read it as though it is.
yeah. A lot of times, just life and blows that happen and disappointments, like we they can make us feel defeated or make us feel like, God, are you there? Are you really with me? Are you hearing me? Are you listening to me? And honestly, sometimes all we have to do in order to get back to that belief or sort of basically build up our faith again is just remember what he has done, not
Mhm.
only just for you but for other people, testimonies that you hear. Like, God is real, and we
Mhm.
have, and the evidence of that is in our history. Like Pastor said here, beautiful, God is in our history.
Mhm.
He's all over. So it's just a beautiful reminder that sometimes all we need to do is remember. So as we continue to read, that's like basically the end of the first speech, Moses' first speech, from chapter 4, verse 44 through chapter 28. It's Moses' second speech, which is the longest of the three. You see, it's 4 to 28. That's a long speech. um, and it's introduced. The first speech was introduced with the words, um, "These are the words," right? And the
Right.
second speech is introduced with, "This is the law," right?
This
So,
is
so Moses' discourse on God's law begins here with a reminder or recap of the Ten Commandments. So we read again, he reintroduced to them the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 6 to 21. The, sorry, excuse me. Whew. The first time we see the Ten Commandments is in Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 17. So what's important, and we can keep in mind as we read Deuteronomy, one approach to understanding Deuteronomy's law is to view it as an exposition of the Ten Commandments. And what is that? Exposition is a comprehensive description or comprehensive explanation of the Ten Commandments. So that's a cool way to kind of put it in perspective.
Mm.
Right? So this recollection of Yahweh's appearance at Mount Sinai also reminds us as the reader, but it reminds them, because they're the audience, right? Moses speaks to them, that these laws, the Ten Commandments, their law is rooted in divine revelation, meaning it was given by God and
Mhm.
even written by God. Like Moses didn't come up with this on his own. No one came up with these laws. These laws were given to them by God and literally written by the finger of God. And that alone, that is what legitimizes their authority. So you'll see that while many of Israel's laws will parallel those of the surrounding nations around them and the surrounding cultures, Israel's laws, this law that Moses is reminding them of, is tied to a covenantal relationship with Yahweh. And that's where all of its authority and legitimacy is rooted in. This is not given to you by me or by anyone. The root of these laws come directly from God. So So again, since the members of the present generation were either children or maybe not present when Israel first received the law of Sinai, Moses needs to teach the laws again. He needs to remind them of them, right? We got to remember again, these people either would not have heard or witnessed the divine encounter at Sinai, or they would have been too young to remember it. So it's important that he reminds them of the law, and he revisits the law with them, he reviews it with them. So in chapter
It's like a
5,
Bible study.
uh-huh,
It's
like a
like the
Bible
first
study.
Bible study.
I guess, yeah. That's a good way to think about it. So, so we see that the verses recorded, like these verses, chapter 5 or 6 21, they record the Ten Commandments, and they basically kind of follow the Ten Commandments we read in Exodus chapter 20 to a T. They're pretty precise, you know. The only major difference that we see is the rationale given for the Sabbath observance. So when we read the commandment about keeping the Sabbath holy, we just see a difference in rationale there. You could read that then if you want to.
Okay. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord, let me bring it up, and that and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God, ooh, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day.
Yeah, we read about the mighty hand again, right? See that again here, reiterated in Deuteronomy. But we see the difference is that in Exodus, when we read about the commandment about the Sabbath and keeping it holy, um, the Sabbath rest is grounded in God's rest from his work after he finished creating the universe. But in Deuteronomy, the Sabbath rest is based on Israel's past experience in slavery in Egypt. So we see like how monumental or how much God wants them to remember to like that not only is it based on the rest that I took when I created the earth, but or the world, the creation, but now this Sabbath rest is also based on your freedom
Mhm.
from Egypt when I took you out of slavery. That's you're able to find true rest because of the freedom you've experienced from
You,
slavery in
and you
Egypt.
can think from just even from a practical angle as well. A practical facet of it is, I mean, they were slaves for a long time, and so it's like things like this is like God training them to not be slaves because they may be free from the people who enslaved them, but when you've been slaves that long, I imagine that, like, do they know how to rest?
Yeah,
They could just enslave themselves in a way.
yeah, absolutely. Which they definitely will have the capability and will spoiler do and continue to do. You know, like how many
Right.
times did they say we should go back to Egypt? We were better off in slavery. You know,
They
so
don't know how to be free.
they don't know how to be free. Exactly. So not only is the Sabbath rest, it's like basically not only established with what God did after creation, He created the earth, but now Sabbath rest is based on Israel's past experience of slavery in Egypt. Like you can find rest now in the fact that you've been freed from slavery, that I freed you from slavery. As we continue to read chapter 6, we read one of the most well known passages in Deuteronomy, a passage that is still very important to the Jewish people and is still reiterated today, the Shema. So that is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 to 6. You can read it then.
Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts.
Yes. Amen. And you read it, it continues to say, so that's a Shema right there. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commands that I give you today are to be on your hearts. When you continue to read verse 7, from verse 7 on to verse 9, it says, and Moses tells them, impress them on your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and your gates. So, like I said, the Shema is one of the most important and foundational prayers in the Hebrew culture to this day. Like to this day, it's one of the most important prayers. And Moses is saying here to the people that not only must the people of Israel memorize and rehearse God's commands, but they must internalize them. So they literally must wear them on their body and attach the words to their homes. So these passages are taken literal to this day and are still practices for the Jewish people today. And I just wanted to show you guys, give you like a imagery of it. So when it says, when we read here, when we read, impress them on your children, talk about them when you sit at home and walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up, tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them to your foreheads. One of the practices that the Jewish people still practice today is something called the tefillin. And I have an image here. There you go, the tefillin. And you see here, you see this man. And well, look at the image on the left too, so you can just see how it looks. The tefillin is basically these leather pouches, these small leather pouches that have these leather, like these leather straps that you see the man right there. He wraps it around his arm and he wraps it around his forehead. And it literally reiterates what Moses tells us to do: tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them to your foreheads. The Israelites practiced these commands by placing the written commandments, in leather pouches and then literally binding them on their arms and their foreheads with leather straps. And this is something that is still done to this day, as you can see. And then another practice is the mezuzah. And the mezuzah, you see examples there. The mezuzah is a piece of parchment inscribed with the specific Hebrew verses from the Torah, which Jews will affix onto the doorposts of their homes. So you see on the right an example of that. That's fixed to the doorpost of a home. So the command to put the laws of Yahweh on doorposts in Deuteronomy 6:9 results in this Jewish practice. So to this day, the Jewish people take it literally. They they bind it to their arm, to their forehead, and they put it on the doorpost of their home, right? The verses written, so verses written on these small parchments include Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 through 9, and also chapter 11, 3 to 21. So this is still practiced to this day. This is very sacred to the Jewish people. The Shema is still one of the most sacred prayers to this day. And so whenever you see this, if you've ever seen it practiced by by someone who's Jewish, it's from this. It's from Deuteronomy, and it's very profound and it's very beautiful. I think it's wonderful. So I just wanted to show you that example on how the people to this day literally impress these words onto them, on their hearts, on their bodies, on their arm, on their forehead, on their homes. It's very profound.
It reminds me a little bit actually of at our church building when the renovation happened.
Oh yeah,
There's actually there's scriptures written inside of the walls now because when the renovations happened and the drywall was down, people wrote scripture, on the boards in the walls and
yeah.
things like
On
that.
the beams, the
Right, on
beam.
the beams, yes. And then when the renovation came in and covered all of it, but it's all there in the walls.
Yeah.
Still, it kind of reminds me of
So TDP, we literally wrote the
that.
word, God's word, on the. I'm sure on the doorpost somewhere there's some verses too, but on the beams and on the foundation of our house, of God's house, of our church.
Mhm.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's great. I didn't think about it that way, but yeah, it's a beautiful practice. Beautiful practice that to this day the Jewish people still observe and they still practice. Um, but continuing with the Shema, the the Shema brings us to our next key theme, which is listen and obey. So the word Shema in Hebrew means to listen, but it means much more than to just listen with our ears or hear, right? It means to hear and respond to what you are hearing. So in English, we would say obey, right? To listen, to hear and respond is to obey. Also, the word love in Hebrew is also so much more than an emotion or a feeling. Love is a decision, and it's also about devotion. So Israel's obedience and devotion to God makes way for them to be a unique people among the nations, a kingdom of priests, like God told them in Exodus chapter 19. So by following God's laws, Israel can not only can show themselves to be a unique people among the nations, but they can show the whole world the wisdom and the justice of God. And that's what they're meant to be. They're meant to be a, a door, a gateway, a blessing unto the other nations and bring them to God. So when we read chapter 6, verse 4, we also read that, well, when we read it here, I'm going to put it here. No, sorry about that. That's what I mean. Hero Israel. There you go. We read there, the Lord is one, right? So Israel's preparing again to enter the promised land, Canaan, where the people worship many idols. We know, based on all we read, that Israel doesn't have the best track record when it comes to idolatry. So this is even them entering the promised land that God gave them, that God is giving them, because the Canaanites are there, because the people that worship other idols are there. It has the potential to be an opportunity for Israel to be influenced and corrupted instead of being the influence, right? So idolatry, he's telling them the Lord is one. The Lord is one. He's the only God. He is God.
Mhm.
And we've seen that idolatry has proven to be destructive. But loving, obeying, and worshiping God will lead to life and blessing. So he wants to remind them of that. And I know the Lord is one. Idolatry is destructive, but obeying God, loving God, and worshiping God will lead to life and blessings. Obey God equals life and blessings. Disobey God equals death and destruction. So yeah, I do want to just read some comments here. I know you guys are commenting here, but Pastor wrote, yes, awesome. The Sabbath is not merely rest from work, but more so about overcoming bondage. It's about freedom. This culminated with the year of Jubilee. Yeah. And Amanda's like, yeah, we did that. I think really profound then. Thank you for reminding me because that was great about that. So, and again, guys, if you have any questions, any comments, let us know. I think we're doing okay on time. We're gonna get through it, so feel free to put in any comments or anything that you notice in the comments.
I think it's funny that I wasn't actually there for that, for the writing the scriptures in the wall, but I remember that it happened.
Look, you see, so it's like you're your own Moses, telling you, reminding you, like you
Yeah.
weren't there, but oh my God, that's funny. But yeah, if we continue to Deuteronomy chapter 7 through 11, um, if you read those chapters, they just continue to emphasize on the importance of loyalty, obedience, and devotion to God. You see that God, that Moses really wants to get it in them. That it's important to be devoted and obedient and loyal to God. As we move on to chapter 12, though, that brings us to another key theme introduced in Deuteronomy, and that key theme is prepare the place. So if we read chapter 12, verses 1 through 5, and I just posted there here too, so we can read it. And I'll let you read it, Ben.
Okay. These are the decrees and laws you must be careful to follow in the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you to possess. As long as you live in the land, as long as you live in the land. Destroy completely all the places on the high mountains, on the hills, and under every spreading tree, where the nations you are dispossessing worship their gods. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, and burn their Asherah poles in the fire. Cut down the idols of their gods, and wipe out their names from those places. You must not worship the Lord of you. Sorry, you must not worship the Lord your God in their way, but you are to seek the place the Lord your God will choose from among all your tribes to put his name there for his dwelling. To that place you must go.
So God is decreeing, demanding them, like telling them that they need to, when they get into that land that they're gonna possess, you gotta clean it out, destroy completely all the places on high mountains, burn them up, break those altars, smash their stones, like clear it out, right? So, what does this tell us? That this place being the place or being the promised land is not just determined by them entering it. No, Moses is letting them know there's a preparation and a cleansing that must happen to make this the true place of worship. In order for this to become the place, you got to prepare the place. There's a preparation that needs to happen. So, in order for this place to be made the true place of worship unto God, we got to clean it up. We got to clean it out. There's a cleansing that needs to happen. So Israel is being instructed, we read it here, he's being instructed to wipe out the names of those idols. Like wipe out those names. And then you, Israel, are to place Yahweh's name in that place. And that is how that place now becomes the place where Yahweh dwells. Right? So it's not just also preparing for the place, but they must prepare to prepare that place. It's not just about you entering it, but what you need to do once you get there. And you, as a sign of devotion to me, wipe those idols' names out of there, and you put my name in that place, and that's what makes the place the place.
Yeah, to put his name there for his dwelling.
For his dwelling.
Like,
That's right.
like that's what makes the place, is that God's dwelling there with them.
Yeah, it's kind of like what we talked about, holy or sacred space, which that actually that ties to that too. Not prepare the place, but sacred space. What makes a place holy? God makes the place holy. God defines what holy is. A place is not holy unless the presence of God is there. And God is saying you have to prepare the place so that my presence can dwell there. You need to place my name on there. And you have to clean that out and wipe those names out of there. And you place my name there. Yeah.
Like Pastor Ezekiel said. Yep. We can see this is them making the place holy, setting it apart for God's name to be there. It's set apart. This isn't going to be like everywhere else. That's the point. This is going to be different from everywhere else. And that means that we can't be worshiping all these gods. We can't be having all these altars to various gods. We can't be making sacrifices. to all of these gods, like that this is a holy set apart place.
Yeah. Like what makes our church a church?
Hmm.
What makes it the house of God? The fact that it is set apart for God and the
Right.
worship unto God.
Right.
Before our church was a church, it was a golf store.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying God wasn't with the people in the golf store, but there's definitely a distinction between the golf store and now it being the dwelling place church, with now it being the place where God and man can dwell. And who
Hmm.
makes that distinction? Us, our devotion to God in that place, because
Hmm.
we put His name on that place, because we decided that this is the house of God and we're going to worship Him here. And there's a certain separation. There's a certain um, respect. There's a certain expectation in that place, like to keep that place a certain way, to give it the respect so it can so God's name can be placed there by us, and now it becomes a place of dwelling for God, right? So it's also about preparing that place, not just about just going in there and treating it like anything else. There's a preparation that has to happen in order to make a place of worship for God. That's the place of worship for God, right? So very profound, bro. So we read here, like you said, we continue to read here in chapters 12 to 16. It just continues to cover the standards of Israel's worship unto Yahweh, which is a reintroduced key theme that we saw in Leviticus: worship, acceptable versus unacceptable. Right. So we read in verse chapters 12 to 16 that they were to have one central temple where Yahweh and only Yahweh would be worshipped in. So God was also to be worshipped, but so God was to be worshipped in this temple. This is the place, the central temple where Yahweh and only Yahweh were to be worshipped in. But not only were they to worship God in the temple, but they were to worship God in their caring for the poor. So all Israelites were to set aside 1/10 of their annual income to be given to the temple. But another tenth was to be set aside every 3 years and given to the poor. So these kind of laws, right? These kind of laws are what separate Israel from the neighboring communities. This is what makes them a unique people. The fact
Right.
that they're worshiping God not just in their temple, or not just in the upkeep of the temple, but in the upkeep and the caring for the poor and the people who need, the people who are suffering, right? So in chapter 15, which is really beautiful, right? Like so,
It's
chapter
a,
15.
there's a lot of laws that are essentially like laws against taking advantage of one another, and like is it in this section that like the laws against like charging interest, things like that, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I believe so. Yeah, and that it's laws. It's basically standards of worship, and
Hmm.
we see that how they treat the poor, and even and we will get into it more about like slavery, against
Hmm.
indentured slavery, like all of these things, all these practices to prevent these things are considered worship unto God. God considers them worship. So we read in chapter 15 that Moses speaks to the people about the year for canceling debts, also known as the Sabbath year, which occurred every seventh year. And then we also, moreover, we read about every 50th year was to be the year of Jubilee, which Pastor mentioned earlier, which is when debts were remitted and properties had been wagered or sold would have been reverted to the original owner. So we can read more in depth about laws for the Sabbath year and Jubilee. They're outlined in Leviticus chapter 25. You want to read more in depth about them. But this, like, as is the 1/10 of the poor, right, is a form of worship unto Yahweh. Like God considered this worship unto Him,
Hmm.
taking care of the poor, making sure that, a system or a structure to prevent indentured servitude is in place, right? Like this reintroduces us to the key theme of deliverance in Exodus. Like we got to remember that God was and is for the freedom of His people.
Hmm.
When He took them out of slavery, His desire was to keep them out of slavery. But knowing Israel, we probably very likely that was gonna happen anyway. So God establishes these regulations to continue to provide freedom to His people and justice and help to the poor. Like God cares so much for the impoverished, for the suffering, and for the freedom of his people, that he considers obedience of his regulations an act of worship unto him.
And you'll see it, when you as you're reading, but like when we're sort of we're shortening it a little bit to like the poor, but it often includes several specific groups of people. That's like widows and orphans, and the poor and foreigners, essentially everyone who would be disadvantaged in a society at this time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We read later on too, like that Moses covers a section about Israel's like their civil life, and it goes back to this taking care of the poor and the widows, and how to take care of your rules on how to about when it comes to your marriage, family, business. So
Mhm.
social justice, right? We're gonna you get into that even more in Deuteronomy as we move forward, but um we read chapter 16 that Moses just reiterates and highlights important feasts and festivals that are to remember, that is to continue, which is the Passover, the Festival of Weeks, and the Festival of Tabernacles. Um, and in 16 to 18, he also highlights the characteristics of Israel's leaders on here are the characteristics the people you put into leadership should have, right? This is how you should choose your leaders, your elders, your priests, and your judges. And Moses was a real prophet, like even from this time, because he knew Israel would want a king because they want to be like the surrounding nations. So he even includes on how to choose a king. Like, here's how when you choose your king, you're going to do it. This is how you should choose your king. You should choose your leadership. And how is that? They were all to be placed under the authority of the covenant law. That's
Mhm.
the gist of it.
And
Like when you choose your, go
I
ahead.
think it's really important for us to think about what, like, the king one stands out to me because it reveals what a lot of these laws are, and because there can be really difficult things in there that are confusing to us. We're like, wait a second, like the preface for the law is like, wait, is that even okay? And it's not necessarily okay. And the king is a perfect example. They shouldn't ask for a king, and when they will eventually ask for a king, it'll be something that angers God. But Moses still gives them laws about the king.
Yeah.
It's
But when you actually choose the king,
right. So not like these laws don't all perfectly encapture the ideal situation, but are knowing what these people are like, what we are like, and what they're going to do. And it's like, so if you're gonna do this, you at least need to do it like this.
yeah, yeah. And what is the gist? Like, what is the main thing you need to focus on when you choose the elders, you choose your judges, and your eventual king? They're all to be placed under the authority of the covenant laws, you know? And how would God enforce this? How would God make sure that this is happening, or at least the best of the ability that this is happening? God would enforce this by sending the prophets to keep these leaders accountable, which leads into our next key theme, the prophets. So we read here in Deuteronomy chapter 18, 14 through 15, and I'll put them up here, but I'll just start reading it now here while we wait for it to come up. Um, Moses says, the nations you will dispossess, listen to those who practice sorcery or divination, right? But as for you, the Lord your God has not permitted you to do so. Like the nations you will dispossess, listen to those. They listen to Miss Cleo, they listen to sorcery, they listen to divination. But you don't do that. God has not permitted you to do that. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him.
Mhm.
So, and also understand that leaders and kings in the surrounding nations, example, Egypt, Pharaoh, right, were considered divine and under a law under themselves. Like they were the law. Pharaoh was the rising and the setting sun. He was the moon. He was a divine being. Pharaoh was the law, right? So that's how other nations viewed their leaders. But Israel's leaders, that's not how it was going to work. Israel's leaders would be subordinate to God's law, and how they will be held accountable to God's law was the prophets. So they would be subordinate to God's law and the prophets. That's how they were supposed to. And this, the prophets would be a part. That's basically saying the prophets are going to be a part of how you govern the people, how we govern our nation, is through the mouths of the prophets. These leaders, elders, judges, and eventually kings will be held accountable to the law, to my law by the prophets. So very profound. And you'll see as we continue the Old Testament, we will see prophets, a lot of prophets in Israel's time. And as you like, we and Pastor were talking about it, like as we read and we read about these prophets and we get into these the prophet books, right? The books of the prophets. Like, is this the prophet that Moses was talking about? This is a prophet, right? That God has raised up in Israel, but is this the prophet? And we will eventually, the story of the Bible, we will find out who the prophet is that amongst the Israelites. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. But as we continue to read chapter 19 to 26, that covers a large section about Israel's civil life, like I mentioned before. So rules about marriage, family, business, about social justice, about their legal system to protect widows, orphans, and immigrants. These rules are basic. You get into more detail about these laws and these rules in chapters 19 through 26. And then those rules are concluded by more laws about worship. So obviously, we don't have the time to go through all of them. That would take a lot of time we do not have. But I did want to just give you some tips that for reading these laws. So when you read chapters 19 to 26, and you stick with it and you go get through it, right? You'll bump into some laws that, to you, looking at in the scope of you and the scope of our world today, could make sense. But then you'll find some laws there that are a little, maybe like, that's random, that's weird, that's bizarre, that's that's a kind of harsh, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as you read these laws, just giving you, a tip as you read it for yourself, and I encourage you to do so. Remember that these laws were given to ancient Israel, right? So what does that mean? It's a totally different time than our time, right? So it doesn't make sense really to compare them to our modern laws, but we should just try to compare them to the laws of Israel's neighboring nations, what we know about their neighboring nations, right? And when we do that, all of a sudden, these laws that seem bizarre or harsh or kind of hard to take in, right? They become more clear to us because they make more sense to the context of the times that these people were living in, right? So remember, God is pushing Israel to another level of accountability and justice that had not been seen before. So instead of looking at that law about how to handle when your sister's brother steals your donkey and the ox takes your newspaper. Like, I'm just putting things out there because they're kind of far-fetched laws there too. But um, instead of looking at the law and saying, huh? And kind of feeling like perplexed or feeling that they're bizarre, we have to try to discern what the core principle, what the core principles are. What are the core principles that underlie these particular laws? Like, what principles is God trying to establish in his people? What is God showing Israel about himself? Or what is God trying to show the rest of the world through Israel about himself? So when we read these laws through that scope, it's going to help us better understand and make them a little more clear to us. And they won't seem as bizarre as if we read them in the scope, in our own scope, in our own understanding. So
Mm-hmm.
just a little tip for you when you read it like yourself, and I encourage you to do so. Um, so yeah, chapters 27 to 28. We read that it covers a covenant ceremony that happens in Mount Ebal. And here we read that the Israelites must erect an altar, offer sacrifices, and inscribe the words of the covenant between Yahweh and Israel on stone pillars, and then proclaim the blessing and the curses that will come with obedience and disobedience, which leads us to our next key theme, which is blessings and curses. So, like the events in Mount Sinai that we read about in Exodus, Here, God is reintroducing covenant again with Israel. And just like their parents, this generation's parents or the generation before them, verbally responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said." Like they responded that to God and Mount Sinai. As the Levitical priests here recite the curses for disobedience, this generation must reply with, "Amen." So when you read chapters 27 to 28, you see this event happening. That not only were the people, the generation before them, as Sinai, not only did they proclaim, "We will do everything the Lord has said," but now this generation had to reply with, "Amen."
Mhm.
So very profound correlation there, like the necessity of proclaiming with their mouth that they are for the Lord,
Right.
right? So then that basically ends the second speech, pretty much. That's like towards the end of the second speech. We enter the third speech around chapter 29, and it's introduced with the same phrase that opens the first speech, like the, the words. And he reminds them again that Yahweh freed them from Egypt. Moses reminds them again of the victories that God has given them. And coming off of the heels of chapter 28, we see here that Moses calls the Israelites to renew the covenant with Yahweh. So after that, everything happens at Mount Ebal, Moses still calls the people and he invites them to renew the covenant with Yahweh, which leads us to our next key theme, which is covenant renewal. So again, Moses warns the Israelites that violating the covenant with God will lead to death. But he also assures them that repenting and trusting God will lead to life and blessing. So Moses presents the Israelites with an ultimatum. And I could have you read that, Ben. This is
All right.
Deuteronomy 30, 15 through 20.
See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, and to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you are not obedient, and if you are drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, I declare to you this day that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live long in the land you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. This day I call the heavens and the earth as witness against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him. For the Lord is your life, and and he will give you many years in the land he swore to give you to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah, so we read here, verse 19. This is the day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you that I have set before you life and death,
Mhm.
blessings and curses. What does this tell us? Israel has a choice. They always have had a choice. Like they're not being forced into this. This has always been an invitation, right? This is always the promise that God has given to their forefathers that what he would do. The reason why God has stuck with them as long as he has is because he kept his promise to them, right?
Right.
But Israel has a choice, and they always have. The
Mhm.
same way we have a choice. We have a choice too if we're going to follow God or not. We're going to obey God or not. But Moses tells them here, he says, "You have a choice, life and death. That's the curse, but I urge you now choose life.
Mhm.
Like choose life so that your children may live, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God and listen to his voice, hold fast to him." And like the Lord is your life. Like the Lord is our life, right? And you've seen, he basically telling like you've seen and heard what happens when you don't choose God. And when you choose to disobey Yahweh, so he pleads with them, choose life, choose Yahweh. It's like choose God so that you and your children may live. Because if you
Mhm.
don't choose God, you won't.
Yeah.
Like, so they have a choice, but he's urging them to choose life, which is to choose Yahweh.
And and like Ezekiel is saying in the comments, like, yeah, my Genesis meter is pinging
Yeah.
on this, and it's really beautiful that as we're getting towards the end of Deuteronomy, we're starting to see these echoes of the beginning of Genesis,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And so yeah, in the Garden of Eden, we had a tree of life, and we had a tree that was the knowledge of good and evil. The consequences of it were death. So
Yeah.
we saw this choice between life and death. It's he's what he's saying to them is you've got the same choice, and there's the same stakes in a way.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and I think that there's another Genesis moment in a way that comes off here, and it's where he says, uh, what verse is it? When he says hold fast, yeah, and hold fast to him there at the end in verse 20. Listen to his voice and hold fast to him. So there's two things that I think are really interesting about the way that that's phrased. Listen to
Yeah.
his voice, which is in Genesis when they make one of the things that he says to Adam is because you listen to the voice of your wife,
Hmm.
she told you to do the thing that I told you not to do. So here, listen to the voice of the Lord. And speaking of merriment, hold fast to the Lord is what is the terminology of marriage in Genesis, that a man will leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife. And so there's this marriage concept coming up again of
Yeah.
that they're in a sort of a marriage union with the Lord. And there's all these like little, it just fires off all of these like Genesis Garden of
Yeah.
Eden chapter
Yeah.
2 moments.
Yeah. Which is just a testament to how we said before. You look at the Torah, Genesis of the
Right.
Torah, and they mirror each other. You're gonna start to see this mirroring of the beginning of things you see in Genesis. We're gonna see them come up again in Deuteronomy.
And
Um,
Deuteronomy's been actually doing this before here as well, just in much more subtle ways that are harder for modern readers to catch and that we don't have time to dig into.
Absolutely, absolutely. We only have a Tuesday night. That's all we
Yeah,
have.
there's a world in there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So he encourages them. You have a choice, but I urge you now choose life, choose Yahweh. So as we continue Deuteronomy, we read in chapter 31 that Moses appoints Joshua as the new leader and says to them another popular passage in Deuteronomy. He says to Joshua and he says to the people, it says, he says, be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. So through this whole book that we've read so far, we're almost through it. Moses has encouraged and counseled this generation to choose life, which is to choose and obey Yahweh. Yet in chapter 31, fortunately, we read that God tells Moses that just as their parents did, these people will also rebel and turn from him. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 16 says, and the Lord said to Moses, you are going to rescue your ancestors, and these people will soon prostitute themselves to the foreign gods of the land they are entering. They will forsake me and break the covenant I made with them. Which is
Spoiler.
really this spoiler alert, yeah. It's very disheartening. Because like I said, this whole book is Moses speaking to the people and preparing them for the place and preparing them to enter the promised land and pleading with them to remember God, to remember, to choose him, to obey him, to choose life, to choose Yahweh. And God tells Moses, you're going to die and you're going to rest with your ancestors, but these people will prostitute themselves. They will break covenant with me again. But there is hope. There is hope, which will lead us to our final key theme in Deuteronomy, which is circumcision of the heart. We read in chapter 30 which is sort of a prophetic word on their eventual exile from the promised land because of the disobedience. Like God says, they will turn their back, they will break covenant with Him. Um, but we see that Moses tells the Israelites about a covenant um, that will happen, a circumcision that will happen, a circumcision of the heart. And if you could read that, then.
Even if you have been banished to the most distant land under the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you and bring you back. He will bring you to the land that belonged to your ancestors and you will take possession of it. He will make you more prosperous and numerous than your ancestors. The Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all of your heart and with all of your soul and live.
Beautiful. You know, there's just hope. Like they will turn their back on God. They will break covenant with God. They will, like God says, prostitute themselves. Again, that infidelity, that imagery of infidelity. And you read that, right? To foreign gods of the land they're entering. But there's a hope. There will be a circumcision of the heart. And reading that, what does this reveal to us about Israel? That there's something fundamentally wrong with Israel's heart. And that it is stubborn and hard. We read that they are stiff-necked people. And God tells Moses, these people are stiff-necked people. Their hearts are hard. Their hearts are stubborn. But the reality is, it's the same thing that is wrong with the human heart, with humanity's heart, right? We see this in Genesis with the rebellion in the garden. Humans choose to govern themselves. They want to define good and evil for themselves, and they ruin the good world that God has created. That is what ruins the good world that God has created men wanting to govern themselves, define good and evil for themselves. But like Moses said, God will one day do something to transform the hearts of his people. He says he will circumcise their hearts and bring them back to him. And that covenant will once again be restored in their hearts. So as we see in Genesis with Abraham, that covenant was first established by physical circumcision. But now we see that covenant will be established by the circumcision of the heart. And that's beautiful. And that's how God will bring the people back to him, by the circumcision of the heart. So Deuteronomy ends with Moses ending his speech with a poem of warning and a poem of blessing. Again, that theme, blessing and curses. And it says he walks up onto Mount Nebo, and that God allows him to see the promised land from afar again. And there he dies. And again, I just was so emotional reading this. I don't know, I was crying like reading this, the end of Deuteronomy, but I wanted to share it. It was so, like, for me, it was so profound to read about this, about Moses. And it says, hold on, sorry, I'm kind of behind in the comments here, but it says, Deuteronomy 34:6-7, it says that God buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite of Beth Peor. But to this day, no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. And then verse 10-12 also says, sorry, Ben, I keep clicking prematurely here. Since then, no prophet has been risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to the whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of Israel. And that's the end of Deuteronomy. And the end of Deuteronomy concludes the Torah. So, but before we end today, I wanted to just share something that the Bible Project shared, and I what do you call it? And I found it. I was like, this is so great. It's so awesome. But though this is the end of the Torah, and you said it perfectly before. Though this is the end of the Torah, this isn't the end of the story, right?
Far from it.
Yeah, far from it, right? So, like Ben says, and like the Bible Project says, like you have all these major plot tensions that are in place, but some that are totally left unsolved, right? So what
Right.
are some
It's not
questions?
meant to be. It's not meant to be the end of the story. Like if these
Yeah,
are the only books you had, you get to the end, you'd be like, wait a second, that can't be it. Like there's got to be.
yeah, for sure. So like, I'll just share them here. Questions unresolved in the Torah. When is the descendant of the woman going to come and defeat evil? That we read in Genesis chapter
We're still
3.
looking for the head crusher.
Yeah. Where is
Saint
when are they coming? When is he coming? How is God going to rescue the whole world through Abraham's family? Which is Genesis chapter 12, right? We read about that. Because God's going to rescue the whole world through Abraham's family. How?
Right now,
Also,
he's still trying to rescue Abraham's family.
he's going to rescue the family. He's going to rescue the world through the family that don't want to be rescued. Look, how can this holy God be reconciled to continuously rebellious people, which you read about in Exodus through Numbers? And lastly, how will God transform the hearts of his people that we read about in Deuteronomy chapter 30? How will God circumcise the hearts? Right? We're just gonna have to keep reading to find out.
Yeah,
But
it's setting like Deuteronomy. It's not. It's like it's the end of the Torah, but it's the end of the beginning. It's
yes,
the end, it's like and Deuteronomy launches us into this new beginning, and that's why it echoes Genesis so much. And Pastor Ezekiel was saying this in the comments before. It's what we've just gotten to is the end of the beginning, right? And it's a new beginning where just like the beginning, we've now been set up of they've got a choice between life and death, and that's sort of what we're being left on is like, and now they're going to go make that choice, and we got to see how that turns out. Now we've been told we've been given the spoiler alerts. Hey, not going to turn out great. They're not going to choose life and stuff like that.
yeah,
But how that's going to play out and how that's going to be resolved remains to be seen.
yeah, yeah, for sure. When how will these things be resolved? Like I said, we just gotta keep reading to find out.
It's a really beautiful, like just the way that the narrative to me, because when I finish Deuteronomy, I feel like just as these people are now standing on the side of the Jordan, looking into the promised land, we as the readers are now standing on the precipice of the rest of the Bible
Yeah,
of like, man,
yeah, for
what's
sure.
about to go down, right?
It's about to go down. And I know you said it's the end of the beginning. I thought you were gonna say, is it the beginning of the end? It's like, that changes it. That when you do it the other way, that's not how it is. It's the end of the beginning. So, um, but what else can we take from Deuteronomy and the Torah, right? Now that we close out the Torah, that the Israelites should respond to Yahweh's love, right? By believing that He can do anything He asks of them, and so should we. No, so as Moses commands the people to love Yahweh with all their heart, soul, and might, to choose God, and that to choose God is to choose life. To disobey Him is to choose our own wisdom, which only leads to destruction. And if we choose to listen and obey God, we will surely see God at work in our lives, in our communities, and in our world. And that's the end of Deuteronomy, and that's the end of the Torah.
Wow.
Yeah, there we go. Yay! We made it. Thank you all for sticking with us, and
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, and continue with us as we continue into the Old Testament. But yeah, that's the end of the Torah. That's
Yeah.
it.
Wow.
Very
End
profound.
of the beginning.
The end of the beginning. Yes. Oh yes, 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 Pastor. Thank you very much. He, you're the best. So take a screenshot of this.
Well,
We
I
just
guess
want
we do.
to. Yes, we do, Pastor.
Someone put that together for us.
I wonder who. Uh, but yeah, take a screenshot of this really quickly. These are the key themes, the new key themes that we were introduced to in Deuteronomy, which is again, prepare for the place. Remember, listen and obey. Prepare the place. The prophets, blessings and curses, covenant renewal, and circumcision of the heart. Yeah. And that's it for me. That's it. Thank
Wow.
you guys.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us so much. A few announcements before we close out. This Thursday, we have Encounter Nights. Starts at 7:30. please feel free to join us. It's not streamed, but everyone is welcome. I don't have like a slide for it, but this Friday is TDP Men's Fellowship. I've got this at the bottom for you. So for the guys, we'll they'll be gathering, and it's being led by Will. If you can, try to let Will know that you'll be there if you haven't already. And then we have Sunday service this Sunday. We have morning prayer at 7 a.m. You can join us for that, and if not, service will start at 10. Looking forward, this normally where the announcements would stop, or I should say that next Tuesday will be prayer call. But looking even farther forward, we are approaching Easter, and before that, Good Friday. And on Good Friday, we are having a fellowship communion potluck. So please join us for that. There's going to be food. There's going to be fellowship. We're going to have communion, and it's going to be awesome. And we'd really love to see you there.
Last year was so great. I just had to put it in there. Like last year, and I know this year it's going to be even better. Like the turnout was so wonderful, and we had such a wonderful time. I really encourage you to please, Good Friday, take the time, join us. And if you do want to contribute something to the potluck, please get in contact with Pastor Daniel. He is kind of taking the lead on this and assigning dishes and organizing dishes. And I'm telling you, you won't regret coming. And we had a wonderful, wonderful time last year.
Yes. Yep. So please, join us for that. And then 3 days later, we will be having our Easter service. And the title is going to be Jars of Clay. So please invite your friends and family. It's a time that a lot of people who may not attend church on a weekly basis will feel led to attend. And so it's a great opportunity. It also means that we're going to be pretty full. So if you can carpool when you wouldn't normally, that would be a great help to the church, as our parking is limited. But that's a small issue, and it's a good problem to have. So please join us for that service.
Yeah.
So with that, those are the announcements. I believe I hit everything that I'm supposed to hit. I'm not good at that, but
no, you did great. You did great. Honestly, you did.
But with that, thank you guys so much for sticking with us, through the Torah and through tonight. And please keep up the good work. Read in your Bibles. It's been a lot, and it's really exciting. Like I said, I feel the tension and the excitement of the people standing on the edge of the Jordan. Like we're going to go into the promised land, and things are going to go down. And for us, that's going into the rest of the Old Testament. So it's very exciting, and I'm looking forward to it. And that concludes the beginning.
That's it. So we thank you for joining us for Bible study. We hope you enjoy your night. And continue this journey with us. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be even greater. So continue with us.
Next time we're crossing the Jordan.
Yep. Entering the book of Joshua. So we encourage you to join us. We thank you for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you in Encounter Night, Sunday service, and all the other events that are coming up. Yeah. We love you. Stay on and say good night to each other, loving each other. And again, we thank you for joining us for Bible study. We hope you have a wonderful night. Okay? Ben, thank you.
Thank you so much again. Thank you so much, Jesse.
And good night, everyone. We'll see you on Thursday.
Good night.
Bye.